Okay. Good morning, everyone. We're still waiting for some people, but I'm going to get started. So this is the mandatory training. I am Jamie Carcella, Deputy Counsel to the City Clerk and the Attorney for the Lobbying Bureau. The first part, we're going to do a PowerPoint, and then I'm going to do, we'll go through Lobbyist and do some filings. We've been doing the small groups because we feel like it's better for discussion. So if you guys have questions, just raise your hand throughout, no problem. And in your folders, you have on the left side is the law and the rules. And on the right side is the PowerPoint. Some announcements. I think there's a PO change form. And my card's in there. If you have any questions, call me. I'm sure I've spoken to many of you in the past. Is there anything else I want to say? Oh, any attorneys that are getting CLE credit have to sign out. And then there's also a survey, if you could turn that in at the end. Whether or not you're getting CLE credit, if you could just turn that in. Okay, so just to begin, I like to do a brief history of the lobbying law. So the Administrative Code was first amended in 1972 to regulate lobbying activity in New York City. Lobbyists were referred to as municipal legislative advocates. They had to get a picture ID card from our office, which they still do in California, so I've been told. Over the past several years, the law has been amended several times, each time increasing transparency in government, which is the main purpose of the law. The 2006 amendments were the most significant amendments to the lobbying law that significantly increased public disclosure of lobbying activities and expanded our office's powers in administering the law. In the 2006 amendments, the council and the mayor was to create a lobbying commission to review the lobbying law, review our office in administering the law. That commission was created 2011-12, and based on the recommendation, and I don't know if any of you remember that, they had public hearings, lobbyists testified, not-for-profits testified, we testified. And based on the recommendations made to change the lobbying law by the commission, the council and mayor passed local law 129 of 2013, which expanded the definitions of lobbying, changed some of the filing requirements, created this mandatory training, and amended some of the late filing penalties provisions. So the lobbying law consists of Administrative Code section 3-211 to 3-223. It also includes our rules that we recently amended, well, I guess it's been over 2 years now, which basically allows us to enforce local law 129. And those rules are in your folder. And then there's the advisory opinions, which we issue on a case-by-case basis, which anyone can request one in writing. We can also do them on our own accord if we feel that there's a widespread filing issue or widespread question about what is deemed lobbying. I'll show you when we get to our website. I'll show you where they all are if you don't know. Mostly they cover, is it lobbying before certain agencies or community boards. And we have two recent advisory opinions. One, I think, was the end of last year on the buildings department. So basically that said the majority or typical applications before the buildings department are not deemed lobbying. They're not covered under the lobbying law. The second advisory opinion we did this year was regarding the secret process, which said that it's not lobbying during that environmental review process. Okay, I'll show you those when we get to it. Okay, so what's lobbying? So the code defines 11 actions that constitute lobbying. It all revolves around attempts to influence. So that's your first step. If you're not attempting to influence, then you're not lobbying. Now some people say, well, I'm really trying to educate them. Okay, but what's the motive? Are you really trying to influence by quote unquote educating them? So that's what it hinges on. So the first two definitions are the most typical definitions that we see when we think of lobbyists, right? Attempts to influence legislation by the council or the mayor, right? So when you think of a lobbyist, you think of these two definitions. Fine. The third definition is not so obvious. So it's any attempt to influence any determination with respect to the solicitation, award, or administration of a contract, grant, loan, or agreement involving the disbursement of public monies. So sometimes we call this the treasury definition. So if you're trying to influence public monies, could be lobbying under this. So for example, soliciting a contract with the city may be lobbying. If a not-for-profit goes to their council member and says, hey, we need X amount of discretionary funding, that's probably lobbying under this definition. Number 4, another not so obvious definition of lobbying, but a large number of filers file under this definition, is lobbying is any attempt to influence any determination made by the mayor, council, city planning commission, borough president, borough board, or community board with respect to zoning or the use, development, or improvement of real property subject to city regulation. So ULURP applications, zoning variances, special permits, all is deemed lobbying under this definition. Number 5, any attempt to influence any determination made by an elected city official or officer or employee of the city with respect to the terms of the acquisition or disposition by the city of any interest in real property with respect to a license or permit for the use of real property, blah, blah, blah. So basically, a lease, if you're trying to lease the city's property, or landmarks would fall under this definition, or leases or permits for the use of, any permits for the use of city property under this definition. 6, any attempts to influence any rulemaking by an agency. 7, any attempts to influence a rate-making proceeding. 8, any attempts to influence the determination of a board or commission. And then 9 and 10, surprisingly, were not covered before 129. Any attempts to influence any determination regarding a council oversight hearing. And then 10 was the attempt to influence the substance of a mayoral executive order. Issuance, repeal, modification, or substance of a mayoral executive order. Then now that's covered. I think the most important addition that Local Law 129 made to the lobbying law was number 11. So any attempts to influence any determination made by an elected city official or an officer or employee of the city to support or oppose any state or federal legislation. So before Local Law 129, all that had to be reported was lobbying city targets on city issues. Now, if you're lobbying city targets to support or oppose state or federal issues, federal legislation, rule or regulations, now that is deemed reportable lobbying. So my examples are dated by now, but if you are lobbying council member to get more funding for Sandy from the federal government, now that's reportable lobbying with the city. If you were lobbying the mayor for universal pre-K funding from the state government, now that would be reportable lobbying with the city. So before, the focus was, the target and the activity both had to be city, but now, as long as the target is a city target, you have to report it. So the code also sets up 11 exclusions to lobbying. So the first one is, if you're responding to a request for information or comments, probably not lobbying. So we deem a public hearing, testimony at a council hearing, would be not lobbying under this definition, because the way we view it is it's an all-inclusive request, everyone to come in and comment. So that would be excluded from reportable lobbying under this definition. A lot of people don't know about that. And then some people say, hey, well, you know, community boards are public hearings. Well, that's still reportable lobbying under our advisory opinions, sorry. But for city council hearings, not deemed lobbying. Also, any communications with a council member during the course of a meeting held at that person's request. So before I said, if a non-for-profit goes to their council member, says, hey, we need this amount of discretionary funding this year, that would be lobbying. On the other hand, if your council member says, hey, non-for-profit, come in, let's meet, I want to talk about how much funding you guys need this year, that would not be lobbying under this exclusion. However, you have to keep within the subject matter of the meeting. So if during the course of the meeting, all of a sudden, you know, it turns into, oh yeah, and that ULIP application we put in, can you try to push it through? That's going to turn into lobbying. So it's very fact specific, okay? So something that could be lobbying might be reportable lobbying, might change to non-reportable lobbying, and vice versa. So just keep that in mind. And that covered that, okay? Number 2 is the contractor exception. So instead of reading it, basically, if you have a contract with the city, any communications during that contract, pursuant to that contract, if there's an audit of that contract, all excluded. The idea is that they didn't want to interfere with the city doing business freely. So if you have a contract with the city, not reportable. Also, during the regular course of procurement planning, once an RFP is issued, your response to that RFP and any communications throughout that whole process, not lobbying. However, if you're going to start lobbying before the RFP is issued, probably going to be reportable lobbying. And it's in the regular course of procurement. So any communications outside that regular course are going to be lobbying. So say the city clerk issues an RFP for widgets, you respond to that RFP, you put your application in, then you call the council, you call a council member and say, hey, can you help me out? That's going to be reportable lobbying because that's not within the regular course of procurement planning. Also, this exclusion does not apply to any communications with elected officials or deputies of elected officials. Regular course or not, it's not covered. So it would be reportable lobbying. Other exclusions. So if you're just advising your clients in relation to proposed legislation, not lobbying. You have to actually communicate with the city to be deemed lobbying. It's not just the communications between you and your client are not deemed lobbying, reportable lobbying. Newspapers and periodicals aren't lobbying. If you're a witness in a public rulemaking proceeding, not lobbying. If you appear before an agency in an adjudicatory proceeding, is not lobbying. So, for example, if the decision maker has no real discretion, if they have to follow certain guidelines where they really can't be lobbied, then it would not be deemed reportable lobbying. So a lot of our advisory opinions from the 80s go into this, and we found that appearances before the BSA is not lobbying because it's a non-adjudicatory. It's an adjudicatory body. 7, if you advertise the availability of goods or services, not lobbying. These 4 exceptions were added by Local Law 129. They only apply to architects and engineers who really lobbied the council for these. So for architects and engineers, appearances before community boards would not be deemed lobbying, whereas for everyone else it is. Designing or drafting plans that are part of the lobbying activity would not be deemed lobbying, whereas for everyone else, any efforts other than the communications with city targets would be lobbying. But for architects, any of their specifically designing and drafting plans would not have to be reported. Work performed in connection with capital projects, as long as the work is performed pursuant to a contract with the city. This was already in the law. It kind of just, specified it more for architects. But basically, this is the contractor exception. So if they have a contract with the city, they don't have to report any communications pursuant to that contract. And then actions designated as minors by the city clerk. We're in the middle of promulgating rules to define what minor is. So as of now, assume everything's major. Okay, so the issue is you can lobby all you want, right? The question becomes, when do you have to report the lobbying with us? And I kept saying reportable lobbying, if you notice. So it's a two-part test. Was your firm retained or designated by a client to engage in lobbying activities? That's not excluded. And did your firm exceed the reporting threshold for that lobbying activity by receiving, expending, or incurring in excess of $5,000 in combined compensation and expenses in a calendar year? And for architects and engineers, it's $10,000. So how do you determine the compensation? So you're looking at cumulative compensation paid by all clients for the entire year. And if you exceed the threshold, then you must report all clients, even pro bono clients. If you engage in both lobbying and non-lobbying, then you're supposed to prorate the portion of the compensation just for lobbying efforts. So a lot of law firms, I say, just do a separate retainer, just do a separate lobbying retainer. You don't have to, but I think it's easier. And that way you can separate out your lobbying work from your legal work. Lobbying efforts include prep work, staff meetings, telephone calls, time spent making photocopies. If you engage in both city and state or federal lobbying, you're supposed to prorate the portion of compensation just for city lobbying efforts. So we only care about city lobbying activity, compensation for reportable city activity. And then you look at your expenses, and if that exceeds $5,000, you're required to comply with the lobbying law. How do you comply with the lobbying law? Does anyone have any questions so far? Everyone's very quiet. No? Okay. We're like breezing through here. So how do you comply with the lobbying law? So everyone knows, right? It's an online filing system, Lobbyist. Everyone loves it, right? No one ever has an issue with it. So you're making filings, right? The first filing is your statement of registration, and it's all client-based. File a registration for your client, periodic reports per client, fundraising and political consulting report, which has nothing to do with your client, a client annual report, which is to be completed by the client, and then there's other restrictions outlined in the code, and I'm going to go through each of these. So the first part of the process, right, is enrolling. You're all enrolled in the system. You also have to get your client to enroll in the system before you can register them, which people don't always like, but we just do it differently than the state. What we found was it was easier for them to enroll and to put the correct spelling of their name, to put their address, to be in control of their information, and then have you guys just pluck from a list rather than the lobbyist entering in the information, because there'd be spelling mistakes or LLCs or INCs missing. Any business designations sometimes be missing. So we came up with this enrollment process. So the client must enroll. It's a one-time process. There's no fee. There's a terms of use agreement. It's really a simple process. I know they whine about it, but it's just a form, right? Fill out the form online, and they send in a corporate filing to show their legal name. We accept the enrollment. The name on the enrollment must exactly match the corporate filing document they send, or else we'll reject it. We don't accept DBA names, so no A, DBA, B. It can only be A, and it can be or B, as long as B is a legitimate DBA registered with the county clerk's office. That's fine. Some clients say, well, I want the DBA. Well, too bad. This is the way it is. Okay. Okay, so Local Law 129 set up the obligation of the client to enroll. A client has to enroll pursuant to the rules within 10 days of retaining a lobbyist. If a client's failure to enroll is going to make you late for your registration, you have to request an extension. It says may because technically speaking, if you don't request the extension, you do get 2 business days after they enroll. It's just annoying. So just if you know they're going to be late, just request an extension. And then we kind of take it from there. If they don't enroll, we'll send them a notice to cure. They have to enroll within 14 business days of the notice to cure. So request that extension. If they don't enroll after the notice to cure, after the expiration of the notice to cure, then there's going to be a civil penalty, which is basically $33 a day, roughly. Okay, so that's kind of your way of forcing their hand to enroll. If they want to get fined, if they don't want to get fined, then they better enroll. We also have, yeah.
Sorry, I have a question. So in terms of retaining, let's say we're architects and client is hiring us to look over the ULURP, but they're not going to go, for the application for some time. Like, is there we still need to get them to register at time of retaining us, or at time
if you're just reviewing the application, or
no?
Mm-mm.
Well, we don't know what we're doing, but I mean.
Right. I mean, for you guys, it could be a little different. It would be more like 15 days of retaining you to lobby, or 15 days from starting lobbying.
Okay. You
can kind of play with it.
Okay.
For other lobbying firms, I mean, they have a retainer that
Right.
says we're going to start lobbying, or you're retaining us to lobby as of this date. It's a little different. So for you guys, and for law firms too, for firms that do things other than lobbying, it's not when you're retained for everything. It's when you're retained for lobbying, or when you do actually start lobbying, or do start receiving compensation for lobbying. Okay, so a lot of people don't know we have this administrative enrollment. So if after the cure period expires and your client still is not enrolling, we can enroll them. So then you can register. So you're not at their mercy. What we were finding was lobbyists weren't registering for a year and weren't reporting for years because their client wasn't enrolling. So now we can enroll. And we put administrative enrollment, so it's pretty clear it's us. Another example of when we do an administrative enrollment is if a client does not exceed the threshold for their lobbying, then we'll do an administrative enrollment. So while you all have your own over $5,000 threshold, your client also has their over $5,000 threshold. If they're not going to meet that threshold, technically speaking, they're not required to comply with the lobbying law, right? So you can reach out to us and say, hey, this client isn't going to exceed the threshold. Okay, we'll enroll them administratively, and they don't have to do anything. Okay, so a lot of people don't know about this either. Try to get them to enroll, but if they really don't want to, they don't have to, so we will do it for them, well, on their behalf. Okay? And then if for some reason they do exceed the threshold mid-year, then we'll transfer it over, no problem. So the principal officer, we call the PO, must be designated in the enrollment form. And it's the person who a person that's an employee of the entity, has to be an employee, that has the legal capacity to enter into a contract on behalf of the entity. So it doesn't have to be the top person, okay? As long as that person has the legal capacity to bind that entity, that can be the PO. The PO must complete the enrollment form. Only the PO can certify the reports, but they can designate other employees to complete the forms. If the PO changes, they must submit a PO change form within 5 business days after that change occurs. I think the form might be in your folders. It's also on our website. Please encourage your clients that if their PO changes, to make sure their eLobbyist account is changed, because the largest number of non-filers for the client annual are those where the PO left mid-year, they left their company mid-year, didn't change the eLobbyist account, didn't tell anyone that they were going to have to file this report the following year, and they're late. And guess who they blame? The lobbyists. So make sure, whether it's now or December, make sure their account holder is, still employed by them, is the correct account holder, so there's no issues come January when they have to make the filing and when they get the notice to cure. They're not surprised, okay? Designee. So a designee is designated by the principal officer in eLobbyist. You can designate 2 designees, and they basically have their own eLobbyist accounts, and they can complete all the forms, but they just can't certify the reports. So one of the most frequently asked questions we get are, I'm in the filing, I can't get to the last screen, there's no button to get me there. Well, guess what? That's because you're a designee, you're not the PO. Only the PO can get to that last certification screen. Okay, so that's why. Designees will get all the automatic emails from a lobbyist. They can, talk to us about specific reports. They can request extensions and submit waiver applications, but they can't certify reports and they can't have access to the PO's password. And a designee does not have to be an employee, whereas the PO does have to be an employee. You can't have outside counsel be your PO. But they can be a designee, and they can be a compliance officer who is an individual retained by the lobbyist whose job duties are compliance work. So they can assist the parties in completing the reports. They can communicate with us about the reports, request extensions, apply for a waiver, but they can't certify reports, and they don't have any lobbyist account, and they can't have access to the PO or the designee's account. Okay, so the first filing. So once you're enrolled in eLobbyist, once your client's enrolled in eLobbyist, the first filing is the statement of registration. If your client retains you prior to December 31st of the previous year, you'll file the registration on January 15th. If you're retained after December 31st, you'll file within 15 days. Like I said before, if the registration will be delayed due to the failure of the client to enroll, then you must submit an extension request. You have until 11:59 p.m. of the filing deadline to submit that request, okay? It's a client-based filing. So it used to be, way back in the day, it used to be, bless you, you'd file your registration and list all your clients on that registration. Now everything's client-based, so you're filing everything per client. There's a registration fee, $150 for the first registration, $50 for every registration thereafter, and everything automatically expires December 31st. So we're different than the state. While the state's every other year, we're every year. So if that retainer continues beyond the calendar year, you have to file the registration again next year. The registration, you're going to put a description of what you think you're going to be doing that year. Why are you registering their client? There has to be a reason. If none of the lobbying activities fit with what you're doing, maybe you shouldn't be registering them. Okay? It doesn't have to be exact, and if it changes, you don't have to update it. Because this is really just the first filing. Your periodic reports is what is going to describe what you actually do during the year. Okay, so rough estimate of what you're going to be doing. And then, like I said, you're going to file in the name of the firm and list the employees you anticipate will lobby for that client. So the state sometimes allows individuals, not of firms, but of non-for-profits, you'll see an individual listed as the lobbyist, and that individual is usually employed by the non-for-profit. But we don't do that. We would have the non-for-profit register as the in their entity name as the lobbyist and the client. So no individuals unless you're a sole proprietor, obviously. Okay, as part of the statement of registration, the filer must submit the retainer agreement with the client. The only terms that are required to be in a retainer agreement are the following. Nothing else is required. So this is why I tell a lot of law firms or even architects that has any confidential information in their retainers, do a separate agreement. All you need is this. Even in the lobbying firms that have multiple page retainers, this is all we need. You can do an abstract. Compensation. So we need to know the compensation. You can't say will exceed the threshold. No, we need the exact amount, whether it's an hourly or monthly. The start date of the agreement. So you have to have a start date. You also have to have the client name. The client name must match the enrolled's name. Any third-party relationships, and we'll go through some of those a little later, examples of those. And then the PO must sign the retainer unless it's impracticable. And that came from, we had a law firm that it was a conflict of interest for the PO to sign a retainer for one of their clients. Fine, no big deal. It's impracticable, have someone else sign it. As long as that person has the legal capacity to bind the entity, fine. If you're missing any of these terms, you'll hear from me. And if you didn't hear from me recently, then you're probably good for the rest of the year. But I just recently sent out emails. Okay, start and end dates. The retainer must contain a start date. The start date is the date representation begins, not the date lobbying activity commences. However, like I said before to you, sometimes we can play with the dates a little if you're doing non-lobbying and lobbying. All we care about is lobbying. So when does that lobbying begin? So the start date must match. The start date on the retainer must match the start date on the registration. So here's what happens. We get all these retainers in, and there's all these different dates. Okay, what do we do? Everyone has different forms of retainers. So typically, sometimes, there'll be a retainer in the form of a letter, right? And you'll have the letter date, and then in the text it'll say effective as of this date, and then at the bottom you'll have one signature date. Maybe you'll have two different signature dates. And then another date is I hear, oh, well, I didn't get this back signed. Even though the client said they signed on February 1st, I didn't really get it back till March 1st. Oh my goodness, what do we do? Okay, the rule is the text of the retainer rules, okay? So if you have if you're specifically mentioning an effective date in the retainer, which you're supposed to, that's the start date you're putting in your registration. Now, the issue becomes what we use to determine the timeliness of the registration. So we will use the latest date listed on your registration to govern the timeliness of it. So if you're telling me, yes, it was signed February 1st, but we didn't get it back till March 1st, then you need to timestamp it received March 1st, and I will use that date, no questions asked. The only caveat is if you're receiving compensation or you're lobbying during that little gap, then there's going to be a problem, okay? So this is only for those folks who there's no lobbying, because most people don't start working for someone until you have a signed retainer back. But for various reasons, people do, and people build them, and that's their own business decision. But for us, if you're lobbying or you're getting compensation during that gap that you don't have a signed retainer back and you're not registering during that time, then there's going to be a problem. And then I'm so glad you're here because I always use you guys, not that I mention your name, but I say that one of the lobbying firms gets cute and puts in the start date as the date that they register with the city clerk's office. So there's no confusion, and they put the date that they register as their start date. Fine, makes it easy. Okay, so does anyone have any questions on that?
Yeah, So you're saying, as long as it says like October 1st in the retainer, and even if they sign it October 3rd, but you register by the 10th, it's fine. Even if you start lobbying, you know what I'm saying?
No, if you started lobbying, no, it's not fine.
But we can put that you're going to start lobbying on October 1st in the retainer.
Correct. And that's what you're going to put on the retainer. I mean, that's the start date you're putting in the registration.
But you don't.
But if you don't register them, and you said what?
No,
Did you give?
you did register with them.
Oh, within the
But
15,
they
then you're fine.
signed it on like the 5th or something.
No, then you're fine. It's fine. It's fine.
Okay.
This is only where people don't get it. People put, you know, the 1st as a start date. It's not signed till the 20th. They don't register till, you know, 10, 15 days after that. Then it's like, oh, you know, it looks late, but it's not if I look further, you know? Okay, any other questions on that? Okay. End date. So an end date's not required, but if the end date is after December 31st of the given calendar year, what am I saying? Then the end date on the registration is 12/31. Okay, everyone knows this. But if you can use open-ended retainers from year to year, as long as you add a letter that says that retainer is in full force and effect in the next calendar year. Okay, so that includes any retainers that say continue on a month-to-month until terminated by either party. Fine, you can use that, but we need the updated letter. That's what to say about that. Okay, client name. So there's a 3-part test to determine the client name. Okay, and this comes about mostly from the property LLCs that have, you know, their parent companies, the subsidiaries, who's who, blah, blah, blah. There's 10 parties involved. They all want to be on the retainer. Who's the client name? Okay, this is the test. First, you're going to say, who is paying the lobbyist? What is the name on the check paying the lobbyist? Number 2, who is directly benefiting? And when I say that, I mean, when you go out and lobby for them, who do you say you represent? So yes, I understand technically a parent is going to benefit from a subsidiary's success. Yes, but when you go out and lobby, who do you say you represent? Do you say you represent the subsidiary or the parent company? And then the third is who signed the retainer? Who, you know, what representative from what entity signed the retainer? So if it's the same, if all 3 of the answers to these questions are the same, that's your client. No problem, no big deal. It's easy. The issue becomes when the answers are different. And I've seen a lot of variety. So here are the rules. And the announcements in your folders, I wrote the announcement and I still go to the announcement when I get questions on this. And the announcement really covers pretty much the 3 different varieties. And you could have multiple parties in each and it could get sticky. But if you have any of these issues, just call me, we'll work through it. I prefer that you call me rather than seeing the name and then it's completely wrong. So just call me and we'll talk about it. We'll go through it. So example 1, A is listed on the check, but the lobbyists say they represent B when they lobby and B signed the retainer. So what you're going to do is this name will be the name enrolled in a lobbyist. So it's not going to be A or B. It's going to be B. The whole name enrolled will be B with A as a third-party payer. That's going to be their whole name. Example 2. A is on the check, B benefits, but A signed the retainer. So then the whole enrolled name will be A for the benefit of B. Example 3. A is listed on the check, A and B benefit, and A and B sign the retainer. So it's going to be A for the benefit of A and B. And like I said before, if there's multiple parties within, then you just, amend accordingly. So for example, say Coke is paying Casira to lobby for Coke and Sprite, but that in one contract. But say they have another contract just for themselves. Then you have to call me. We have to do 2 separate enrollments, one just for Coke and then one for Coke for the benefit of Coke and Sprite. And we have to assign, for all of these, we'd have to assign them, well, no, I'm sorry, not for all these. Only for those where there's the 2 that I just described with Coke and Sprite, we'd have to assign a TIN. For all the others, when they enroll, they'll use the TIN number of the first party listed in the name. And you'll use the corporate filing for the first party listed in the name. And then that first party is responsible to make all the filing, well, their client annual. They'll be responsible for that. Okay?
The first code is 967.
Okay. Incorrect information on retainer agreements or statements of registration must be corrected. So if the client's name's wrong, if the start date on the retainer or the registration's wrong, these must all be changed. This is different than information that changes. This is when something's just wrong. It's incorrect. You have to fix it. If you don't fix it, you're subject to a civil penalty. So these are the ones where you get annoying emails from me, right? I send an email, this is the name's wrong, the date's wrong. You have 2 weeks to correct it. After 2 weeks, if it's not corrected, you'll get another annoying email from me, second notice. And then after another 2 weeks, you get a notice to cure. Then you have 14 business days. So you have till the end of time to fix it. And then after that, no mercy. Civil penalty will automatically start after the cure period expires. Okay, so again, I think I just sent second emails last week. So if you didn't get anything, you're probably okay for the rest of the year. And again, the civil penalty is roughly $33 a day. But believe me, I've had thousands of dollars in fines just because the lobbyist didn't correct my name. I mean, it's silly. It's very silly. And a waste of money. So amendments are treated differently. It's a different violation of the code. So if information changes, so example, the compensation changes, there's a contract extension, so the end date changes. If the entity name changes, if you are adding lobbying employees, these are all required to be done within 10 days from the date the change occurs. The same rules that I talked about for the start dates apply to any contract extensions. So if there's a contract extension but you don't get it back for a month later, same rules to determine the timeliness of the amendment. An amendment. I said this before, an amended statement of registration is not required when the lobbying activity changes. Because your periodic reports are going to report what actually occurred. Okay, so amendments are violations of amendments are under the daily late fine. Okay, so it's not the civil penalty. You don't have till the end of time to do it. You have to do it within 10 days of the change occurring, and after that, it's an automatic $25 a day late fine. So what I recommend is, once you get that contract extension in, just amend right away. You have 10 days, but I have someone recently that just slipped through the cracks. I understand, but there's nothing I can do to reduce the fine when something slips through the cracks. So, I think they had like a month to do it, and they just forgot. So just when you get it in, just do it. Try to do it right away. So if the compensation's going to change, you have to do an amendment within 10 days, amend the registration, upload the new, if it's not in writing, upload a letter, stating what the new compensation is. Okay, periodic reports. So assuming the start date is January 1st and the end date is December 31st, You're going to file 6 periodic reports per year. They're due every other month on the 15th of the month. They cover the prior 2 months lobbying activity, right? Right now we're in the 5th period. Your 4th periodic reports were due 2 weeks ago. And if the filing deadline is a weekend or city holiday, then the deadline is the next business day. So periodic reports report the lobbying activity that actually takes place in the given period. So again, it's all client-specific information. You're going to list the employees who lobbied in that 2-month period, a description of the subjects lobbied, the person or agency lobbied, which includes the contact person and the ultimate decision maker. So if you want to lobby the city clerk, but you come in and you talk to me, you're going to put him and me because he's the ultimate decision maker. Okay, the code requires that you put the compensation paid or owed by the client. I tell people billed, which doesn't mean physical bill, it's just how much are you going to bill them. But what I've told people over the years is the law does say paid or owed, so you can choose. Just be consistent among all your clients. If you're going to go the paid route, make sure you do that for all your clients. You're reporting how much they pay. So at the end of the year, it all adds up. If you're putting billed, not necessarily physical billed, however, I do understand, practically speaking, that you don't get your billing in until the end of the month if you're an hourly, and that might delay it. Again, all I care about is at the end of the year, does it all add up? Okay, for that year. Don't continue to the next year. Keep it all within the calendar year, okay? So again, I say billed or earned. Okay, periodic reports must be filed every period regardless of if lobbying activity took place. That is from the law. The exceptions are, once you file a termination notice, you don't have to file any other periodic reports, except if the termination is in the middle of a reporting period, you have to file that periodic report, and you always must file the 6th. So, for example, looking back at the calendar, say you have a January 1st start date, you decide the client and the lobbyist decide to part ways. They terminate the contract early, May 15th. So you have to file your first periodic report, your second periodic report, and your third, because the 15th is in the middle of the P3, and your 6th. The 6th is the annual report. Everyone always forgets if they terminate mid-year that you have to file your P6. Just remember, the code requires a separate annual report. So we actually combine the P6 and the annual, so you only have to file one. So just keep that in mind. When you terminate the client, you're still going to have to file that extra report at the end of the year. And I always get yelled at for that. It is what it is. Okay. Any questions on periodic reports? We'll go through one when we get to the lobbyist. Fundraising and political consulting report. What is this? It has nothing to do with your clients. This is all on you. A registered lobbyist, lobbying firm, lobbying entity, is required to file a fundraising and political consulting report if any person required to be listed on the registration engages in those activities. It's the same time period. The applicable time period is the time period listed in the registration. Oh, as well as 6 months. So if you're a new filer, I don't know if any of you are new filers, but any new filers, there's also a 6-month look back. So 6 months prior to filing your first registration, if a person engaged in fundraising and political consulting, you have to file this report as well. So what's fundraising? The code defines fundraising as soliciting or collecting campaign contributions for a candidate for nomination or election for mayor, public advocate, comptroller, borough president, council, or any city public servant running for any office, city, state, federal. So You are bundling. You're an intermediary, is what Campaign Finance Board will call you. So this is not your own personal campaign contributions. This is lobbyists soliciting for someone. This is a lobbyist collecting for someone. You're collecting and you're giving to the campaign. The campaign will typically register. They'll file. They'll list you as an intermediary in their filings with Campaign Finance, and that's how we check this. So we'll look at Campaign Finance records and compare who's listed as intermediaries there with who files these reports. It's also any person required to be listed. And many of you may not be aware that spouses or domestic partners are required to be listed on the registration as well for this very reason. This was added in the 80s, I think it was the 86 Amendment. And the idea was that they didn't want those people who help get, the council and the mayor and all these elected offices elected to then lobby those people that they get elected without transparency around it. So that's the whole purpose of this report, is really transparency so that the public can see, who's collecting for people and then who they're lobbying. Okay, so you can do it, you just have to file this report. Then there's political consulting. So for the fundraising, you don't have to receive compensation to solicit or collect. For political consulting, it has to be, it's any lobbyist who receives compensation, and that says to provide political advice. The code actually says, the code is actually very broad, and it says something like any, if they're involved in any aspect of the campaign. It's very, very broad. So any lobbyist who receives compensation to provide advice or be involved, with the election of any of the above listed elected offices. So only for compensation. Volunteers, volunteers work on a campaign, that's not included here. It follows the same schedule as the periodic reports, but you're only going to file if you engage in these activities. Does anyone have any questions on this report? Okay. So the client annual report is filed by clients, right, who exceed their threshold or who meet the threshold by exceeding $5,000. Lobbyists may assist clients in completing these filings, but only clients can certify them. Termination notices must be filed within 30 days of the termination of lobbying activity. That needs to be corrected. So if a contract terminates naturally by its own terms prior to December 31st, you have to file the termination within 30 days. Or if the parties agree to prematurely terminate the contract, you have to file the termination within 30 days. If you think that if a contract terminates naturally by its terms and you think it's going to extend, you can wait to file a termination notice. You have 30 days to do so, so just wait. It's kind of a waste to file it, then delete it, but termination notice is actually the only filing you can delete. So 30 days you don't extend, file your termination, and then say another 30 days you decide to extend the contract, you delete the termination, amend the registration, and go from there. Like I said before, even when a termination notice is filed, you have to file the periodic report, the period in which the termination took place, and the P6, always. Okay, just to review, if your firm is retained by a client to lobby and exceeds the reporting threshold, then you have to comply with the lobbying law, the city lobbying law, by filing reports, a registration, statement of registration for each client, including pro bonos, 6 periodic reports per year unless terminate, a fundraising and political consulting report if applicable, a termination notice, client annual report, which is filed by the client, and extensions may be granted if made in writing for good cause prior to the filing deadline. If you think you're going to be late, request an extension. We freely grant extensions. We are not like the state. I know the state, it's harder to get an extension, but it's easier to get a reduction or a waiver of your fine. We are the opposite. We do not reduce fines. We do not waive them unless there's, extenuating circumstances. So request an extension. Even if you're sick that day, and you really can't do it, and you can't do it, you have until 11:59 to request an extension. Just email me, anyone, any contact you have with this office, just email them. We'll send you a form, you'll get the extension. We give them in 2-week increments. So obviously any system-wide problems with the lobbyists, you'll get an automatic extension. But don't assume it's something system-wide just because you have the error. You'll wait to hear from us on that. Technical extensions. So basically the rule of thumb is if you're having a tech issue, call us. Try to get someone on the phone. Keep in mind, if you're calling or if you have the error on the day of the filing deadline, you might not get through. We're very busy. There's thousands of filers. So if you can't get us on the phone, email us. You're going to have to take a screenshot of the error message you're getting. Make sure there's some kind of date stamp on there. So, the screenshot typically will have, the time on your screen, but also put your mouse over it so the date shows up. So we know if you have to report at a later date, we know you were trying to do it on the day, you were trying to do it prior to the deadline. Try to get us on the phone. If not, email us the screenshot. And then we'll give you an extension. By technical issues, I mean those annoying red error messages at the top of a lobbyist. I don't mean your internal server issues. I don't mean the PO can't log on, as in because they don't remember their password. Not that. And if your client didn't change the PO, they will not get a technical extension based on those circumstances. And then any technical failures reported after the filing deadline, you're still going to be fined for your lateness, but then it'll be told from the time you report it until the time we fix it. Okay? So you're not out of luck. Does anyone have any questions on extensions?
I have a question back. Why do you, if you terminated it, there, why did you delete the file?
Why what?
Why did you delete the file?
If you're extending the contract. I'm saying, so say the contract ends and then you agree to extend, 2 months later you're entering into a new contract, but for our purposes you're extending the registration. We call it extension.
If we do the termination but don't delete the what, and we don't have an extension, we have to.
No, you just, no, you're only deleting it if then you are going to extend it. Sorry, I didn't mean to confuse you there. You're terminating only if you need to undo the termination because you're continuing the registration in the year, then that's when you would delete it. So, we have the ability to deactivate reports. For your purposes, it's deleting because you won't see them. We'll still see them, so we call them deactivating. Basically, what happens at the beginning of the year is, you guys all are trying to get your filings in on time. It's a very chaotic period, and you might not get all your retainers signed back, but you go and register your client, and then whatever reason the client says, you know what, we're not going to sign this contract. We won't be retaining you this year. Fine. But you already filed the registration. Before, it had to just stay there all year. You'd get these annoying emails every period that you had to file the report. Unless you could terminate it, but you'd still get, emails. So now we can actually delete it for you. You just contact me, and I'll send you an affidavit, fill it out, and we'll deactivate it. And basically, it won't be subject to random audit. It won't be viewable by the public. and you won't get any other emails on it. So like I said, it'll just be deleted for your purposes. Okay, so we have that ability. So if you want to review those slides. Co-lobbyists. So quickly, I don't know if any of you have co-lobbyists in this room. I think some of you do. But basically, this enhancement came about because lobbying firms were hiring another lobbying firm to lobby for their client, you know, if that firm specialized in something that the client needed. That first lobbyist was a client under the lobbying law. Lobbyists don't want to be clients. I understand that. So they're lobbyists, they're not clients. So we came up with this co-lobbyist filing, basically similar to co-counsel, right? So you probably see at the bottom of the first page of the registration, I think it says, are you a co-lobbyist? Will you be hiring a co-lobbyist? Maybe you haven't given it any thought and just skip it over because the defaults are no. But that's what this is. So client, and this is when the client pays the primary lobbyist, but the primary lobbyist pays the co-lobbyist. If the client is paying both, it's not a co-lobbyist, okay? It's completely different. If you have any questions, you can always call me on it. We can go through it. But you're following the money, so the money's going this way. So it's the primary lobbyist that's cutting the lobbyist the check. So technically speaking, they would be the client, right? But not now. So they're the co-lobbyists. So same kind of thing, but everyone's filing their own reports. They'll just select, you know, when they get to the part, and I'll show you, when they get to the part in the registration that says, are you a co-lobbyist? You'll put yes, and then the next screen you'll have to select the primary lobbyist from a list, you know, same as you would select the client. So the primary is registering the client, the co is registering the client, and then separately, it's all separate, and then each party is going to file their periodics. If the co-lobbyist doesn't exceed the threshold, however, then they wouldn't have to file, okay? So again, the threshold always applies, so just keep that in mind. Sometimes the co-lobbyist might not exceed, so they might not have to file anyway. And then the client on their annual will list both. So these filings kind of just connect all the parties together. So each year the Lobbying Bureau conducts 45 random compliance audits. If you didn't get a letter about one, then you're in the clear because they're doing field examinations now. They do field examinations, and they basically, so they look at all the filings for one client. They'll look at the client filing, and then they will issue a report that lists required actions and findings. Some other requirements of the lobbying law that I like to mention: you are required to retain records for 5 years. Basically, any documents that substantiate anything in your reports. This is finances, but it's really anything that you put in your reports. If you have any like diaries or that kind of thing, that would need to be saved. You are prohibited from receiving compensation from a client on a contingent basis. If it looks contingent and it smells contingent, it's contingent. So just make sure it's not in your retainer agreement. Just link it to something else. Link it to something else. If you're providing other work, link it to that. Don't link it to the city lobbying. There's other agencies that regulate pieces of the lobbying law. We can refer willful violations to DOI. Conflicts of Interest Board regulates the prohibition of lobbyists from making gifts to public servants. It's a de minimis gift, so I believe you can buy a cup of coffee, but I refer you to them for those rules and regulations. And then, as a registered lobbyist, campaign contributions are ineligible for taxpayer finance public matching funds program, and I refer you to Campaign Finance Board for those regulations. So there's violations of the lobbying law I like to go through. So the first one is Any knowing and willful violations are subject to a cease order and a civil penalty of up to $30,000. We've never had this. A majority of the violations are the late filing of reports that are subject to the daily fine, right? No one in this room is at $10. It's all $25 a day. The $10 is only the first filing that you've ever made, okay? After that, it's not the first year of filings, it's just the first filing. After that, it's $25 a day. And then there's a civil penalty that you could be subject to of up to $20,000. And then there's also the failure to correct an incorrect report that I talked about, which is under the civil penalty. Those violations are prosecuted under the civil penalty. And then a failure to file a termination notice is also prosecuted only under the civil penalty provision. So, I said before, request an extension if you're going to be late. We give them so easily. You can put any reason, you'll get it. We rarely waive or reduce the fines. In the past, we didn't have any discretion at all. But Local Law 129 gave us limited discretion. And in our rules, we set up the process for filing for a waiver reduction. It's based on whether or how often you're late in the past, the annual operating budget of the filer, if you're a lobbyist client filer. So really the waiver was for not-for-profits, basically. Any mom or pop shops that had one person doing all the filings, God forbid that person couldn't do it that day, they could seek this. That's really what's behind the waiver reduction. So knowing that, ask for the extension. The amount of unreported detail in the report that was late, and then the significance of the impediments to the filing, which what is that? It's the death or an illness of a PO or designee or immediate family member thereof, okay? So the violations under the civil penalty, I said this before, so failure to correct an incorrect report and failure to file a termination notice. I told you about the annoying emails, the notice to cure, and then the civil penalty schedule is roughly 33. It's 33.3 a day, 3 a day. Okay, so the Lobbying Bureau can investigate unreported lobbying on our own accord, or in response to a complaint made by the public. And this just talks about that process, and you can review this. Okay, any questions, any assistance, contact the help desk. That's the email address, phone number, my card's in the folder. Any questions? Okay, so any questions on the PowerPoint? No? Oh, okay. You guys are easy. Now let's go. Oh, it's not? Oh, she didn't put it in there. It's supposed to be in there. Okay, so here's our website, cityclerk.nyc.gov, right? We're known for the Marriage Bureau. So when people say, well, we issue marriage licenses, and then when people say they get married at City Hall, it's really our office. It's a fun place that people watch on a Friday afternoon, brides all decked out. I don't know, when you walk through the long hallway, I don't know if you saw anyone. Yeah, it's also a really beautiful office. So Bloomberg actually had his own decorator come and decorate the office because he felt it was very important to make the office nice for people's important day. Right, so Marriage Bureau. Then we have the Lobbying Bureau. So here's us. So here's all the tabs. So first you have the law, the rules, right? Those are in your folders. We like to keep a calendar of the filing deadlines for, upcoming years. So if you want a calendar ahead of time, it's all here. Now here's our advisory opinions. So there's a ton of them. So like I said, a lot of them from the 80s are, lobbying before Landmarks, tax commission. So this is yes, this is lobbying, this is not lobbying, this is lobbying, this is not lobbying, this is, and so forth. So you want to check those out. These are other, lobbying defined. Who must register? And then there's a numerical index. So these are the latest two that I talked about.
How often do you come up with these advisories?
It's when we get written requests, and I haven't had one in a while. So,
All those architects last summer didn't want to write to you.
well, these would be the two
Yeah,
for them.
but I thought there would be more.
Yeah, no.
What about city planning? Like if you were to, go to city planning on behalf of the client to talk about rezonings,
That would be lobbying.
that's
It should be here. Training. So here's the presentation will be here. This is a helpful e-lobbyist video. It goes through the different filings. If you have any questions, check that out. We have a YouTube channel. FAQs. If you have any questions, go here first. The e-lobbyist one is excellent. It covers everything. So I recommend you going here before you run to call us, because chances are your question will be here. I mean, the answer will be here. Sample forms. So here's a PO change form. Here are your extension request forms. So there's one for the registration, one for other reports. If you get the email from me that you have to change the start or end date in your retainer, the form's here. If you have to change a client name in the retainer. So it's basically just a letter. So I don't want you to just cross off the name, change it on your retainer. I want you to do a letter. It has to be signed by both parties, changing the name. So you just copy and paste this form, and you'll attach this to the retainer and upload it to an amended registration. Okay. Announcements. So announcements is what we do more frequently. So if there's a widespread filing issue, we'll send an announcement to everyone, and then we'll post it here. Haven't really had one in a while. There's one on extensions. You should check this one out on extensions, extending retainers. There's a co-lobbyist one down here. That'll explain the co-lobbyist. And then the third party announcement that's in your folders with the client name, that's here. So these are our reports that we issue every year. If you want to see what we're doing, we also do. We also put out like the state does. The top 10 lobbyists, top 10 lobbyist client filers. This is the public database, and then here's a lobbyist. Okay, so let's go in. So this is actually the account I used to do the administrative enrollments. I also have my test company on here. So see, this is, so if someone requests an administrative enrollment, that's what it'll look like. So it'll say administrative enrollment, and then in there I'll put, it'll be our address, our phone number. Well, it'll be the client's address, but our phone number, and I'll assign it to him. Okay. All right, so, this will be your home screen for the year. You can go back in previous years here. And this will list all your clients. Now, any clients, like I said before, that were deactivated, you won't see on this list, but I'll see them. Not that it matters, but I think I forgot to mention that if you need to reactivate, there's no such thing as reactivation. You'll have to refile the registration, okay? If you do need to file eventually. Okay, entity profile tab. So this is all from your enrollment, okay? This is all from your enrollment. Edit the profile. Now, if you notice, you won't be able to edit the PO name. You won't be able to edit the PO email address. I'm not sure why. I think they just wanted us to control it instead of it being a free-for-all. So if you have a PO change, submit your PO form. If it's just the email that's changing, you'll still submit the change form, and we'll just change your email. This is where the PO is going to put the designees in. So they'll put in the email address, last name, first name. Once they hit save changes, that person will get an email to set up their own password and set up their own account. Okay, you can put 2 in there. Only 1 PO, but you could have 2 designees. This can never be changed. So once you put your lobbyist, you can't say no. There's no consequence in that. It just can't be changed. Here's where you're putting this is the entity address, okay? This is not the PO's address. This is the entity address. This has to be changed. All letters will go here. If this is not your right address, you're not going to get the letters, and your fines are going to go up, and I don't want to hear it. So fix it. Okay, save changes, and then that'll. Okay, entity employee tab. So this is what we call the employee store. So you're going to put all the employees you think will be lobbying here. You can add them all at once. Now, I'm sure you all know, eLobbyist, everything has to be certified in eLobbyist, certified. So let's add someone. I think I have so many Jane Does and John Does. Home address is required. That's for campaign finance purposes. That is not public information. Spouse and domestic partner, like I said, is required to be added. That is also not public information. It's for campaign finance purposes. Unemancipated children must be added within 48 hours of a campaign contribution being made in that child's name. Again, not public, just for campaign finance purposes. So spouse always has to be added, child only after the campaign contribution's made. And that's personal campaign contribution. That's not the soliciting or collecting I was referring to before. Start and end date. So this doesn't necessarily have to be the date the employee started working till then, ever. It's really just, all we're concerned about is lobbying. So the day they started lobbying. I tell people to leave the end date blank unless that person leaves and they don't want to be, they don't want to be available to be selected on future periodic reports. Put an end date, but otherwise just leave it blank, and then they can be selected every year. If you put 12/31 of one year, you're not going to be able to select them for the following year. So just leave it blank. It's just easier. You can always add another period, but this start date is really important because this start date is going to tell eLobbyist what periodic reports this employee can be selected for. So if you're putting they started 10/3, they're not going to be available to be selected on a periodic report for May or June, okay, or any other period prior to October 3rd, okay? So it's very important. If frequently asked question, if it's grayed out in your periodic report, like you can't select the person, the box is grayed out, this is why. The start date does not fall within the period in which you're filing the periodic report for. Okay, so I'm just gonna make it easy. Save. Okay, new. Yeah.
There's an app period. What is that app?
Yeah. So if you end, say the employee stops lobbying and you want to put an end date, but then they start lobbying again, you can add another period. I don't think it lets you go back. Let me see. I don't think. Hold on. Curious now. Oh no, what happened? I know. Why did it leave? Oh, it's because I went back. You're right, because I uncertified and I went back too. There it is. Okay, let me see. Okay, let's see if I add. Oh, I guess, can I delete it? Oh, I can. I guess I can do it until it's certified. But once it's certified, okay. So I'm gonna. I'll show you something in a minute, but just to show you. So it says new here, right? So, like I said before, everything in Lobbyists has to be certified. So this is not certified yet. So another frequently asked question: my employee isn't showing up on my registration. That's because maybe it's not certified yet. So check that. That's another check. You can put all your employees in at once and then certify them all together. So this is how you'll certify. I'll just select certify. And then certification is just putting in your password. So we'll just put in the password. And now it's certified. Now let's say, can I delete it? Oh, I still can delete it. That's weird. I would have think it would have made me have to add another period, right? Oh, but now it's in draft, so I would have to certify it again. That's weird. Interesting. So I guess you don't have to add another period, you can just change it. Okay, so let's just certify this guy. Okay, certified. Okay. So everyone thinks because fundraising political consulting has its own tab, it has to be filed every period. Like I said before, it only has to be filed if you engage in these activities. And to file it, you'll just view details, and then you'll file the report. So I just want to show you quickly. So this is all pre-populated, and then it'll ask questions. Have you or employees engaged in soliciting or collected campaign contributions for the elected offices? And then it'll ask you questions about political consulting. And then if you hit yes to any of these, it'll just take you through and you'll just fill in the information. So here's your fundraising. So you'll add your candidate and you'll just follow the trail. Put in the information, how much you raised. I can't leave any of this blank, but I don't want to do it, so. Okay, and then same for political consulting. I'll just take you through that, okay? Okay, so file your registrations up here, right? So this is the list of all the clients that have enrolled. If they're not on this list, they didn't enroll. They might have said, oh yeah, we enrolled because they thought filling out the form was enrolling. But if we don't process the corporate filing, the enrollment's not going to be in here. They're not going to be on this list, okay? You can type in the name up here and search, or you can go through the letter of the each letter of the alphabet to find them. Okay. Start date. So your start and end dates are really important. Same thing, same concept that I mentioned with the employee start and end dates. Same thing here. Lobbyist is not going to let you file periodic reports that are not within your start and end date. So, frequently asked question, I can't file this periodic report, it's not letting me. What do your start and end dates say? Is your end date June 30th, so you can't file your P3? So the system is thinking you don't have to file the P3. Your end date is in the P2, if I'm doing my calendar properly. Okay? Frequently asked question, go to your registration, check out your start end dates. This happens a lot when people forget to file their extensions. So if it ends, like I just said, June 30th, but you did get an extension, but say you forgot to amend the registration, and you're thinking, oh, well, I had to file a periodic report because we extended. But if you didn't amend the registration end date, it's not going to let you. So then you say, oh no, I'm late with this amendment. And that's usually what happens. That's how you usually discover the late amendments, is when you can't file the periodic report. Okay, client industry.
The second code is 423. The second code is 423.
Oh, it's supposed to be. And then this will, so here's your co-lobbyist, right? So if you get, oh yes, you're a co-lobbyist, the next screen, we can just go to it. The next screen, it's gonna take you to adding a primary lobbyist. So you'll add your primary lobbyist. Will you be hiring one? Yes. It'll take you, now you're gonna select your co-lobbyist, and there could be multiples. Okay. Add your employees. So you want to add, so we're at your registration, right? So you want to add all the employees you anticipate will be lobbying for this client in the entire year. You cannot add employees to periodic reports until they're added to the registration. So, frequently asked question, you get to the periodic report, the employee's not here. They're not there at all. They're not there at all. They're not grayed out. They're just not there at all. It's because they weren't in the registration. Okay. So for your employees, first you have to add them to the employee store, and then all the information you added is pre-populated and available for selection in the registration. They have to be in the registration before they can be added to the periodic report. Okay. So let's add all these people. And then I think I tested last time, if an employee is listed here but it's grayed out, it means the end date is in the previous year. Okay, so like I said, the dates are really important. So eLobbyist really uses all those dates that you enter. Okay, so I added everyone. Let's add an activity. You have to add an activity to the registration. Okay, it's gonna make you. I tested this last time. I got to the ends. I didn't add an activity. I got to the end and said, you have to add an activity, so I had to go back. You have to. Like I said, it doesn't have to be exact. Why are you registering this client? There has to be a reason. Okay. Here's the drop down. We got rid of non-procurement. Everyone's upset about it. If it doesn't fit in one of these categories, maybe you don't have to register the client. It's got to fit. These mirror the definitions of lobbying, okay? It's got to fit somewhere. Figure it out. If you can't figure it out, call me, call anyone, we'll work through it, okay? It's got to fit.
I actually have a question. This state issue is new. I never saw that before.
It's, remember the 11th definition of lobbying that I said this was the biggest change? This is when you're lobbying city officials on state issues.
Oh, okay.
That's when you're going to select that. It should say federal issue too. So if it's federal issue, okay, that's that. Okay. So let's put budget, discretionary funding, rough details. Okay. I know it could change. Rough. It's fine. Target. You have to put a target. Okay. Who do you think you're going to be lobbying? If it changes, it's fine. You don't have to change this. Let's just put a rough estimate. I want to show you council, because council has different categories. So if you're speaking to committee staff, you're putting committee staff. The actual member only, you're just talking to the member, you're going to select member. If you're just talking to the staff, you're going to select staff, okay? You're going to select the council members. You can put, I think you could do all by doing, holding down control, add, okay? Then you're gonna put a contact per member. So you put staff, so who are the staff that you think, remember we're in the registration, so who do you think you're gonna be talking to? We disabled the contact on the registration because we realized you might not know it at this point, which is fine, okay? So fine, continue. It should let you, let's see, it lets us. Periodic report, it's not going to let you. It's going to give you an error message. It's going to make you put it in. And that includes anyone at the meeting. So if there's multiple staff members at the meeting, you had to put each one. There's 10 contacts can be listed per member. And then I think 10 members per activity. 10, I think it's all 10. I think it's by 10. So 10 targets per activity, 10 contacts per target. Okay, so let's just put member here. And this list should be updated every year. And if it isn't, just email us. Okay, see, I didn't add a contact, so it's not there. But I have my my two activities, or 2 contacts, 2 targets. Okay, here's the last screen. So it says you'll be mailing the retainer and paying the registration fee, or uploading it right here. So you can upload it here yourself. It has to be scanned as a PDF. Each time you amend, you have to upload all effective retainers in a given calendar year as one PDF. If your retainer mentions a prior year, so if you say, the parties agree to continue representation 2017, and all other terms in the 2016 retainer are in full force and effect, we need that retainer. We need to know what terms you're talking about. So if you refer to a prior retainer, it has to be uploaded with the current retainer as one PDF here. Or you can just send it to us, okay?
Can I ask you a question?
Mm-hmm.
Why? And you have the other retainers on file?
Because e-Lobbyist, no, this is a fix in e-Lobbyist that we have on our long list of fixes. So every time you do an amendment, it only pulls from the latest amendment. So almost like your old information is deleted. I can see it, and can you see it? I don't think you can even see it.
I can't see it.
Right, you only see the amendment.
Yeah, right.
And so does the public. The public only sees the amendment. So that's why if you're changing your start date or end date, that's why I say if you have a contract January 1st to May 1st, and then you have an extension and it starts July 1st, that's why I say don't put in your amendment, don't put July 1st as a start date. That's why I say always leave it as 1/1, because it only pulls from the latest amendment. You only see it, the public only sees it. I see both, and that's why I'm able to tell
That's what I figured.
the mistake.
All of them, so I never understood why.
That's why.
Okay, so the public got
So if you're just putting the latest retainer, that's all that's being seen. I know it's annoying. It's on the long list of fixes. So.
Every time I do it, I forget to. So.
Yeah, right. Hey, just send this to us if you want. Then you don't have to do it. Okay, continue. And then here's your registration. And then you certify, right? And here it is. So it's in filed status. A registration being in filed status does not prevent you from doing any other filings. It's not like this how the state has to process each registration, right, before you can make your other filings. We're not like that. You can go ahead and make any other filings. The only thing you can't do is amend the registration. So see how here it says, here it says completed and you can amend. Here it doesn't. That's because we have not received the retainer agreement and or the registration fee. Once it's complete, you'll be able to amend, but like I said, it doesn't prevent you from doing any of your periodics, okay? So don't wait until you're incomplete to do your periodic reports. If they're due, do them. You're not waiting for us for anything, okay? So this is where you file the periodics, right? View details. In orange, frequently asked question, what if a report's not orange? Well, first of all, if any previous reports are not in orange, that means your start date is not within that period. It's not, like I said before, Lobbyist doesn't let you file reports that aren't within your start and end date. So if your start date is, like I said, July 1st, these reports will be grayed out, okay? Also grayed out, the reporting periods don't open until the first of the month of the filing deadline, okay? So these end dates are wrong, but that should be the due date. But you can't file the November report yet. It's not November, okay? So You know, a lot of people get annoyed that the annual report can't be filed. If you terminate a client mid-year, you can't file the report until the end of the year. That's also on the long list of fixes, but that is what it is. So, termination report is here. Why can't I file a termination report? That's because your end date is listed as 12/31. So it's telling the system you don't have to terminate. What do? You go into your registration, you amend the end date to today's date or a date prior, and then this will light up in orange, and you'll be able to file it. Okay? Periodic reports. This is all pre-populated. Add your employees. If you add an activity, you have to add an employee. And I think if you add an employee, you have to add an activity. I don't know. City planning. Application. I mean, you're supposed to put, actually, you're supposed to put a description in the details that is sufficient to identify the actual activity. So if you're doing anything with property, you're supposed to actually put the address. Check out this list right here. It'll tell you exactly what you need. We're in the periodic report, so you should know at this point what you're doing. You have to put the contact name, so this is the actual person that you spoke with, as well as the decision maker. So you should put the commissioner, and it's going to make you add someone. Total compensation, see it says paid or owed, so I said just be consistent, don't put dollar signs. You can put commas, but don't put dollar signs so you get an error message. Here's, you're gonna put aggregate of all expenses to support staff salaries. Any expenses that are $75 or less, you'll list in the aggregate. If any expenses are greater, you'll itemize them. And then you're gonna add reimbursed expenses, and we added this field because this is part of the client's threshold, is their reimbursed expenses. Is the expenses that they reimburse to you is part of their threshold. So separating it out allows us to figure out if the client is required to file their annual. Okay, this screen was added, people were very confused. If you need to add any additional information, now you have the availability to upload a document like you do in the registration to the periodic reports and other reports. So say you needed more room for targets or activities, you can upload it right here, okay? The default is no, so chances are it's no. But I don't know, people got really confused and upset about this screen. It's really just the same, it just gives you the availability to upload something if you need to, for whatever reason you have, I don't know. Well, I just listed some examples. Okay, here's the report. Certify.
Still limited to 20?
Oh, it's 20, isn't it? I think I said 10. It's 20 activities, and then 10 target. Is it
Yeah.
20 or 10?
It's 20.
Oh, 20. I think I said 10, so it's 20 for each.
So that's why that's actually helpful.
You're right, so you can add, yeah, right. Okay? Any questions on a lobbyist? The user guide's always available here and throughout each screen of each filing. The user guide's here. It's really long, so don't print it, but it's good to do like a search term, and it'll show you. It has all the screenshots, and it's pretty good. Okay? All right, see you in 2 years.